Liev, I want to ask you a question, not just as a friend, but as a fan, that just crossed my mind. In an actor's life, when I told you that my in-laws love you as Ray Donovan and my kids love you as a superhero. But for me, a movie that really impacted me very deeply was Defiance.
Yes, Defiance, the story of the Bielski brothers.
And my question is, when you live through that and you become that person and you film, I don't know how long you film, when that movie ends, has that movie changed you and do you adopt a little bit of that commitment, because they're like the resistance against saving Jews from the Holocaust? Do you think that gave you a little bit of a sense of the responsibility towards the world?
I think that mostly everything in one way or another for me is connected to my grandfather. And I think that I take the jobs because it feels like something I want to understand better. For me, the best thing about this career is I'm paid to make this journey of identity, and I get to experience things and learn about things and do things that inform my own understanding of who I am, where I come from, and where I'm going. And that Defiance was certainly, for me, a way of trying to understand where I fit into that culture, A, of being Jewish, A, of the Holocaust. The story that had always been told to me, the impression had always been left that, if you go to Yad Vashem or things like that, there's boxcars full of eyeglasses and shoes, but tucked away in the corner is a tiny little picture of the partisans who fought back. And the notion that we went like lambs to the slaughter had always been sort of disturbing to me. And to find out that there were people who fought back, that there were brave people who resisted, and that there were lots of them, Jews and non-Jews, who fought back against fascism and fought back against the Nazis, it's one thing to know about it. It's one thing to know the history, which I think is really important. But I think it's also another thing to get to experience it, to live through it, to feel it. And it was, doing Ray Donovan for 7 years and living in that darkness, because for me, the key element of Ray was amping up tension and then not expressing it. So you were sitting on dynamite all the time as a character. And I never really thought, well, that's just a technique. That's just an acting trick. And it never really occurred to me the toll it takes on your adrenal system and also how you behave when you come home. And I remembered after about doing 4 or 5 years of it, coming home and playing with the kids. And Sasha said to me, "Dad, you're not Ray Donovan." And I realized in that moment that maybe I had brought some home. Maybe I had brought a little bit of Ray home. And I started to really think about that a lot, that you have to, I think it's important as an actor to create beginnings and ends to each day when you're working and shooting, like a little process of meditation to say, we're going to open this day, we're going to go in here. And then at the end of that day, we're also going to sit for a minute and let it go. Because when you do something for that long, it becomes apparent that it's impossible your body doesn't know. You're tricking your body. You're tricking your body in the same way that you're tricking the audience, that you're not really feeling those things.
Why is it that your grandfather was who you were always trying to better understand? Did he help raise you?
Yeah, my mother and father separated when I was 4. I was raised by a single mother in New York, and she was a really interesting person, painter and a bit of a beatnik and a hippie, and drove a taxi and we lived a crazy life. We were living in squats and she was on welfare. And the one stable person in my life, I used to love to go to his house because he always had root beer and chessmen cookies, was my grandfather, Alex. He would deliver meat to diners, and my brothers and I would work with him. And he was just the man in my life in many respects. And he was also the person whose house we would go to for seders, and was kind of the organizer of the family. So I mean, even at that age,
father figure,
kind of my father figure. I think even at that
age, did he get
to
see your success?
Yeah. He saw me in a play. I told him when I got into Yale, he was ecstatic. And then I told him it was the drama school, and I think his heart kind of dropped into his shoes. But
He wanted you to be a Jewish lawyer or
he wanted
doctor.
me to be a doctor, yeah. Anything but an actor.
Yeah. My dad wanted me to be a doctor. I ended up being a lawyer. And then right after law school, I decided to go peddle sun-dried tomato sprates on the streets of New York, made by Palestinians and Israelis working for peace. And my mom and dad were like, what happened to a nice Jewish lawyer? Because my parents didn't get to go to college. My dad only had a third grade education when I think my dad was in the
Yeah,
Holocaust. He was a
yeah.
concentration camp survivor. He was in Dachau. And my mom only finished high school. And so it was very special for them that I finished college, let alone the first person to get a college education.
Are they still alive?
My dad is not. My dad was
Or was he able to
20
see
years
your
ago.
success?
Not kind, not kind. He didn't see kind. I wish he did. But my dad got to see a glimpse of what One Voice was going to become. And he was a little bit at peace when he saw that, because he really was wondering what I was doing with my life. And I think he was very proud. But are you close to your brothers?
I am. I am.
Do they have a sense of commitment to helping the Ukrainian people like you do?
They're not as connected as I am, but they're very thoughtful and they're very concerned about the situation. But
We were talking earlier about how this is important for two dimensions, right? For the Ukrainian people as winter's coming, and then for the world.
I think, obviously we were talking before about not just the politics in America, but the trouble in the Middle East and Putin's sort of cynical strategy of taking advantage of the smokescreen that's created for him and really being quite aggressive. You mentioned about the missile attacks in Kyiv the other day and the 53 people dying that I think barely anyone seems to know about. And it's so important that we, just from a humanitarian perspective, that we keep an eye on this, politics aside. I mean, obviously, for America, we have huge geopolitical interests over there, as does the rest of the free and democratic world. If Ukraine falls, it really is quite an issue for all of us. But just from a humanitarian perspective, that they've been holding off probably the second largest military in the world for almost 2 years now. And we have to remember that as we head into winter, and as you you get sub-zero temperatures in Ukraine during the winter. And with Putin's strategy of hitting in medical infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, I think that's his essential strategy, is to make make life so miserable for the Ukrainians that eventually they want to stop fighting. I mean, it was certainly the approach in Syria and obviously other places, but it's really important now more than ever, not just because of the trouble in the Mideast, but because we're heading into winter, and because I think we've lost sight of it in this country, how important it is that we help Ukraine, and in specific, that we provide humanitarian aid to Ukrainians during this war.
Yeah, we formed together, you and I and Jose Andres, the famous chef, and Garry Kasparov, the chess master, and Colonel Alex Vindman, one of the most decorated heroes in the United States, and a man of great courage. We care deeply about this stuff. We formed together a group to try to put a spotlight on what's going on in Ukraine, because of the danger that, sadly, particularly because it's already been almost 2 years, people seem to get distracted by the seriousness of the issue, and the stakes are so high, because if Putin's aggression is not stopped, bullies are just going to continue. Like, he's had over 20 years of history where he serially goes into Georgia and into Crimea and into Chechnya and into Georgia, and he basically slowly but surely keeps degrading all of his neighbors. And where is it going to stop? And so the fact that Zelensky, who I know you've met on a couple of occasions in Ukraine, the fact that he had such incredible inspirational courage to stand up and to inspire his people, but he's not doing it just for the Ukrainian people. He's doing it for the world, to stand up against totalitarian, authoritarian, nihilistic, extremist thugs that want to basically use force to conquer democracies. And there's this weird alliance between the Islamic Republic regime repressing the people in Iran, sending drones to help attack the Ukrainian people, funding Hamas and training Hamas terrorists to do the October 7th massacres, funding Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and all of these totalitarian, authoritarian, nihilistic Islamist jihadist groups have this unholy alliance trying to weaken and divide and destroy. And we need to try to unite and build light, build together and bring light. In addition to the work we're doing, you do something very specific with BlueCheck Ukraine. Can you explain what it is? Because I think it's extraordinarily important work.
Well, I'm just going to say, I'll go back and tell you how I got involved with BlueCheck and what we do. But I think when people talk about fatigue, Ukraine fatigue is a term I hear. And I think I wanted to say that I understand that. Like I hear that fatigue, and it's not just Ukraine. It's a general fatigue that we're all feeling from all of the horrible things that are happening in the world right now, locally and globally. And I think that for me, it's like all we can do is remember who we are, what our principles are, what we believe in, and hang on to that. Because sometimes I think it's easy to just go, it's far enough away from me that I'm not involved. It's never going to touch me. And of course, that's not true. All of these things are going to touch each of us, each and every one of us, very intimately soon. They're just going to keep growing unless we hang on to our principles. And what makes us the greatest country in the world is that we're still the single best destination for anyone who's looking to give their children a shot. That's what our democracy is. And that's the thing that more than anything is feeling tragic to me, that we've lost track of that. We've lost track of how important it is to be American and what it means to be American and what we fought countless wars, the American Revolution over, was the right to self-governance. And that we would use that right to self-governance to a purpose, to good ends, to ensure that everybody, regardless of religion, race, color, creed, had an equal shot at something. Now, it's not always the case. It's an imperfect system, but it's still the best one we've got. And that thing, to me, as a great-grandson of Ukrainian immigrants, and I think probably for yourself as a proud son of Mexican parents, to come here and to have that opportunity, it just occurred to me, and there's a larger story that I'll tell about BlueCheck, that we've always taken that for granted. But it's something that we do have a responsibility towards. And it's a funny thing, because it's not even a responsibility towards America, although I do feel that. I think it's to our grandparents. This is a nation of grandparents. You know, it's hard, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who didn't come from somewhere else at some point, who came here to make a better life for their grandchildren. And that's one of the reasons that I think Ukraine is so important to me, or feels so intimate to me. When the war first broke out, a friend called me and said, would I do like these live stream interviews or something? And at that point, I just felt like using my celebrity or doing anything creative around the war just felt wrong. And I kind of barked at him and said, look, if you really want to help, just send them some money, and hung up on him. On that call was a guy named Jason Cohn, who was a former director of Doctors Without Borders. Between him and Michael Goldfarb, one of the other founders of BlueCheck, is about 30 years of experience in humanitarian aid. And they called me and they said, how serious are you about this? I said, yeah, I'm serious. And all that week I'd spent on the couch with my kids and watching these men, some of them my age, some of them look very much like me, hugging their wives and children and saying goodbye and getting on these buses to fight in a war. At that time, we were all convinced they were going off to certain death, that they were wildly outnumbered, outgunned, everything. It's the second largest military in the world. But that moment of how does this occur in our time, that someone should be separated from their children, and someone should be separated from their wives, not knowing if they'd ever see them again. That hit me hard as I sat there with my kids and thought, well, maybe I'm not as far enough away from this as I thought I was. There's a humanitarian watchdog organization out of London called Humanitarian Outcomes that writes really interesting reports on aid work. And one of the things that they said is that localization of aid is incredibly important. In other words, the main principle of BlueCheck is that Ukrainians are the people best suited to help Ukrainians. The local intelligence, resources, language, they're there. They're the first responders. And so the model for BlueCheck that we came up with was that we would find local Ukrainian NGOs, boots on the ground people, and through the embassies and through Ropes and Gray and Integrity Risk International, we would vet and verify. First of all, we'd organize them and get them to file as NGOs, and then we would try to raise money for them. And actually, Jose Andres, we talked on the phone once, and literally 2 days later, I bought a plane ticket to Ukraine. And Jose hosted me in one of his kitchens where I cooked on the border for about a week while we figured out the lay of the land. And then we went in. And now we have 22 partners. We have one in every oblast of Ukraine. And while it's been a really tragic situation, everyone has been really amazing in both giving and in terms of identifying and finding the people who are doing the work and making sure that they get the resources and support they need.
You cannot understate the importance of BlueCheck Ukraine, because when you're trying to help people and you're wondering whether your money is going to land in the right place, and there's just a ton of confusion, and how is it, the fact that you guys have the best organizations, the people on the ground checking, so that you know that if you support Ukraine through BlueCheck Ukraine, you know that the money is going to land in the right place. Anybody that's thinking about helping in the holidays for those people that are entering the winter and that are standing up against aggression and totalitarianism, they can know that they can count on BlueCheck Ukraine. We're now together, the group of us, with Jose Andres, Garry Kasparov, Colonel Vindman, you and I. We're documenting what's going on so people do not forget, almost 2 years into it, that ballistic missiles are being still launched by Putin's army into the capital of Ukraine, killing, like today, 53 people. And since the October 7th attacks by Hamas, it seems like it's been a concerted effort of Putin to open at least 2 other fronts, while you said there's that smoke screen, and while people are focused on this other very painful war, the Israel-Hamas war, to try to weaken the West. And when I think about it, Liev, with a lot of empathy for the Ukrainian people, and I'll tell you where I really do feel enormous empathy, but my primary reason why I do this is out of what I would call enlightened self-interest, because that's why my father taught me that, and to your point, if you think that these things don't come back to haunt you, anytime you allow totalitarian thugs to invade another country, it will catch up with us and it'll cost us a lot more. This is actually an incredible historic opportunity for us to stop that totalitarian aggression, thanks to Zelensky's incredibly inspiring mobilization of his people in the world. And if we defeat, and we will defeat, Putin's terror, it will send an incredible message to the rest of the world that is not acceptable, that you cannot launch unprovoked wars against your neighbors. If you don't mind, I want to ask you something else.
Sure.
When you and I met in New York, besides the fact that I realized that I'm quite short and ugly compared to you, because there was a post that I put on with a coffee that I made for you, and I'm like, am I that short? Maybe I wasn't wearing shoes that was in my hotel room, but I guess you were like 6'3" or 6'4", and I'm like what I call a
I'm glad there's somebody as self-conscious and vain as I am. It makes me feel a lot better.
I know. I called myself a Jewish.
You think at our age we would grow out of that sort of thing?
No, but the pictures, like,
I'm a year older than you, so it's very comforting to me to know that there's another guy my age who still behaves like this.
But going to a serious topic, at that point you mentioned that one of your friends was Jonathan Safran Foer, and that you guys had talked a little bit about also doing work to fight anti-Semitism. Little did we know, because this was in September when you and I met, little did we know that then October 7th would happen, and then anti-Semitism, which was already at an all-time high back in the early fall, just has exploded. Since October 7th, it's exploded 388% off of an all-time high. And I'm just curious how you're thinking about, have you talked to Jonathan? Because I don't recall if I've met him or not, but I really admire him. Are you guys thinking about what to do on that front?
We have been talking a lot about it. Jonathan's been very active in the community and speaking a lot. For me, it's been really trying to understand how I feel, really trying to be clear. And there's such a rush in social media. The Times did a very interesting piece on this, that we're compelled to pick a side. That the idea is it's confrontational from the get-go. You're on one side or the other, and you have to state your position. And I prefer to see it as the thing we were talking about earlier. What are my principles? What are my values? What do I know? Who am I? And to take that moment to kind of sit with yourself before you respond, before you react. It's like, any Freudian therapist will tell you this. It's like to take a breath and go, where am I? What do I feel right now? There's a quote that I find particularly moving and that I hang on to, which is, there is nothing so whole as a broken heart. And dealing with the complexity for me and the duality of this and the reality of both sides and being able to handle that is very, very difficult, First of all, my heart's broken about the cruelty that exists in the world and about the number of people who have lost loved ones and the horrific way in which they lost loved ones. But that should turn into anti-Semitism is unacceptable. Or that should then veer into anti-Islam is unacceptable to me. But it's not an easy journey. There's a lot of history here. And people need to really understand it before they stake their claim or hold their ground and get ready for a fight, because it's not about that. It's like, what are my principles?
Earlier today, I had a podcast with Liev, and we were interviewed because she and I wrote a letter to college students with 10 tips for how to navigate the very, very divisive environment. And one of the things that struck me that I've been thinking about, very connected to what you said, is I'm very proudly Jewish. I am very proud of my heritage. And I'm a very proud friend of a lot of Palestinians that I've worked with for over 20 years to build a movement against extremism on both sides to try to build a better future for both peoples. And I notice it's hard for me. Imagine how hard it is for everybody else that doesn't have those relationships. And the danger of social media's shallowness and narrowness is that not only do we get, like you said, not the facts, we just get this very simplistic oppressor versus victim, us versus them, and shallowness.
It's very simple. Those are algorithms that were created to divide us for the purposes of marketing, divide us and categorize us for the purposes of marketing. And they've become so powerful and pervasive that they've created this incredibly combative environment, which I really, really think is a huge issue. And just being aware of how we're affected by that. Even the dopamine reaction that we get from our phones, it's profound how these things affect us. And just being aware of,
like Lonnie Ali, the widow of Muhammad Ali and the head of the Muhammad Ali Center, was just an incredible leader with great energy. Her voice doesn't travel as much as the voices of people that are screaming, "Let's kill the Jews." And the voices of the people that are being the builders don't travel as much with these algorithms, which behooves us to do even more to build those bridges.
Absolutely.
The other thing that's essential is to develop the skill sets to be problem solvers rather than dividers. And, the Starts With Us movement that we are a part of, that's part of the umbrella of builders versus destroyers, is about equipping young people and old with the daily habits for us to stop polarizing and dehumanizing and start solving problems together. But fundamentally, it's about the 3 C's. curiosity, compassion, and courage. Curiosity, just have a little, because we're living in an age where everybody thinks they have all the answers, where in fact it's the worst, right? We have the least amount of answers. So curiosity towards those that you actually might lean to disagree with, try to understand. Because if you better understand the person, you have a far better chance to advancing your cause. Try to be more compassionate also. Try to listen to the other side, put yourself in those shoes, try to understand where they're coming from, and then the courage to work across lines of difference to solve problems. And it doesn't happen overnight. There's a ton of work to be done. And the good news, Liev, is that in spite of everything we're seeing, in fact, these are fringes. I was just talking to a person an administrator at a school in Arizona, and there were 8 people that they had identified that were extraordinarily problematic, that were really filled with enough hate to be concerned. And there were 200 people that were mobilizing in very aggressive marches. But there's 80,000 students in that campus, 80,000 students. And we just need to remember that the people that are extremists, even if they're a tiny minority, they wake up in the morning and they're like, how can I advance my cause? And the people that are moderates, they wake up in the morning and they're like, what can I have for breakfast? That is a fundamental challenge. Moderates, which are the overwhelming majority, if they are passive, they're going to cede the space to the extremists to become destroyers. Moderates need to become builders. They need to become active. Anybody that's listening to us today and is overwhelmed by what they're watching, what can I do? There's absolutely things you can do, starting with how you behave every single day towards every person that you come in contact with. Like I saw you and I saw that in you. You're just such a kind soul.
For me, it's also a commitment that I made to these people, a promise that I made that I would do my best to remind the world of what's happening and to keep us focused. And
let me going back to what we were here for, let me ask you a little bit about your thoughts on, like, I was just reading a data point that it's been over 19,500 children that were abducted by Putin and his people, taken away from the arms of Ukrainian mothers, abducted into Russia, and they're being reprogrammed to try to become Russian and to hate their motherland. It is, as a father, for me, one of the most terrifying thoughts.
Yeah, could you imagine?
If we were to repatriate and save one child every single day, it would take 55 years to get them back, just to get a proportion of what is 19,000 children.
We're not going to move that slow.
We cannot move that slow. We cannot move. That's my lifetime.
Yeah.
We
had a summit.
It's really essential.
Yeah. We had a summit on December 7th with the president of Ukraine, and a bunch of world leaders who have all agreed to figure out ways strategically to deal with this. And I think just having the conversation and continuing that conversation for the next day and the next day until all of those kids are back. But it's just unacceptable that almost 20,000 kids at this point that we know about. I know that you know Michal as well, and one of our partners at BlueCheck is Save Ukraine, who have done a couple of missions already to bring back a few hundred kids, but there's still, as you know, thousands more that need our help and need the attention, frankly, to what's happening.
If anybody's touched by hearing this story, support BlueCheck Ukraine, tell this story, forward this video, support Save Ukraine, learn about it, share it, because this is, a lot of people are not even informed about. This is a war crime of history.
In our times that would happen, that somewhere is some 10-year-old kid living in another country, wondering when he's ever going to see his parents again, being programmed to hate his homeland and his parents and his family. It's just, I mean, for those of us who are parents and have, it's just a horrible, horrible thought. And we've got to do everything that we can to keep people aware of what's happening there.
We're teaming up on December 19th to try to spotlight some of this footage of what people are going through in Ukraine, both the horrors, but also the heroes that are.
We have the choir too, right? The children's choir? This choir?
Yeah, there's that the Dumka Ukrainian Children Choir in Grand Central,
Got that.
and with some very beautiful surprises and some very powerful efforts to try to bring to light the plight of these children. And we hope that people will show up and will also spread that word.
Absolutely.
Liev, is there anything else you want to share?
No, I'm grateful to you for starting the conversation and continuing it, and for, asking BlueCheck to join you, and for reminding people
Thank you
about
for
what's
your
happening.
partnership. Thank you for your inspiration. Thank you for your leadership. And we look forward to continuing to work together.
Thank you, Danny.